cost of compliance effort. And now we've received recommendations from this group, and thank you for the commitment and the dedication you put in the last 2 years to prepare this. And I think, given the effort that everyone has invested in this, that we should make our own commitment in terms of reviewing the recommendations that have been provided to us and bringing back to the board for consideration in September, around there, a proposed resolution with respect to, activities, with respect to timing, with respect to how we would go about implementing various recommendations that we believe are appropriate. I'm thinking of something very similar to the resolutions, and Ms. Haven is in the audience, the resolutions the board adopted to improve the underground storage tank programs when we underwent some crisis several years ago. I like the idea of outlining, what some of the activities are, what some of the gaps are, what some of the time frames are, so that we all have an understanding of where certain efforts might be leading us. I mean, I definitely appreciate Mr. Bishop's comments, but I would like to see that documented in some way. And I think, obviously there are other ways to do it, but the idea that comes to me right now is some resolution for board consideration with respects to next steps.
Okay.
All right, and I just have a few comments. Thank you. Thank you for the work you did listening to people. I do think that this version is more, as I said to the POTW group, you can see that there's stuff that's on the cutting room floor that I'm sure people had some attachment to, but the way you're presenting it is helpful and easier to say yes to. And I think also quite a bit of it, and again, I'll read every word, dovetails with where we're heading, as you saw in the MS4 Phase 2, and what we all agree that we want a more, whether you use the word sustainable or anything, a more integrated water picture, particularly in Southern California. The thing I would add to my colleagues about that, I just want to see some stuff done on the ground and some places where we can actually do some stuff and put it in practice. And Susan and I were a part of a conversation in Southern California that's trying to do some of that, and so is Jonathan. So we'll work on that, but we're doing a lot of it. We're looking at the anti-degradation policy in general, and that fits in with maximum. But I mean, we're already looking at figuring out how to use some of those tools. We'll be developing a stormwater policy. We're developing a groundwater policy. Let's make sure the groundwater strategic plan and the stormwater strategic plan are integrated, because they're coming from different people, and it would be really weird to have them not integrated, and my guess is you're already thinking about that. So there's a whole suite of these suggestions that, make sense. So I would say, in adding on to what Member Dudek said, is just figure out a way to capture and frame the things we're getting in both places. And I would leave it to you in talking with us individually, because we can talk in more depth, and talking with Susan and Jerry and Bob and whoever else you want to, figure out, is there a framework that doesn't tie ourselves in knots, but just can see a path towards doing some stuff.
I'm totally supportive of that, of course. I would caution that that, and I hate to sound like I'm putting it off, but as you have both spoken, the project has gotten bigger in my mind, not smaller. So I will be talking to each and every one of you about what your expectations are, and then put together if we can make a September timeframe to bring all that together, because I'm a little cautious based on trying to outline a framework of tasks that we can accomplish in just a couple of months.
I think that's fair, and but my caution would be is that I'm thinking more about think about it and how we can do it, rather than having to overwork a giant document on our own. I think sometimes we think about, we're very meticulous in a lot of the things we do. Everything becomes policy. It's the 18-month time frame, et cetera. I'm talking about a thinking document and framework, not a formal regulatory proposal or anything. Because I actually do think strategic thinking precedes strategic planning, and the mistake some people make is thinking about the work product they have to write, as opposed to where's the lightest touch that gets us the maximum benefit for our scarce consciousness and time too. So a lot of individual conversations with us and other people, some folks from the environmental community, others. I'm sure in your further conversations, if some of us are a part of those, or our staff, that'll also help. But I see a lot in here that's of value, and I had some specific questions, but I'll save them.
Let me make a request then, based on what Mr. Bishop just said. Ideally, I'd like to see some kind of a proposal, the resolution implementation framework, but at a minimum, I'd like a report back to the board at one of our September board meeting in terms of where, where we are in the process.
Sure, we will definitely do that and try for a resolution that lays out a framework, because that's what I think we're headed towards, as opposed to a set of tasks that we'll accomplish by a certain date.
Thank you. Just a final request. These items that may have dollars attached to them will have to be approved by the budgets in both houses. It would be nice to have some inside information from you as to where you think your best opportunities lie and where you think you're going to have the most difficult time in trying to get some of these dollars, so that we know how to apply our efforts best on your behalf.
I would just add to that.
Level first before we get to that, but that is an important implementation step.
Keep in mind that this is a fairly wide group that has brought this report together, and they each have, frankly, lobbyists that work in the Capitol all day long, so it's not just Bob Lucas going over there by his lonesome self, all right? We have a whole team that's ready to go on your behalf.
The one thing that I would add to that is that you asked whether or not the group was able to come up with priorities in terms of which of these were most important. No. There is so much disagreement.
Well, they're integrated, too.
They're very integrated. It's hard to identify one above another. But, I mean, there are POTWs, there are stormwater people, it's such a herding cats kind of group that it's really hard to do that. And, frankly, that is the role of a board.
Okay. Thank you very much. Nice job. All right. Item 7. Lucky number 7.
Number 7, yes. Item number 7 is a 6-month update on the underground storage tank program, and I think that we have got a whole gaggle that are going to join you. I'm not sure, Kevin, are you leading this, or is? Okay, so Kevin will start.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. My name is Kevin Graves. I'm the section chief of the UST and groundwater cleanup, should be site cleanup section in the Division of Water Quality. I'm going to start off our UST program update today, transfer to Lisa, and then to Chris Kerrigan. How does this work? The outline of my presentation today, we'll start off with a chart of case closures versus time, talk about the LOP certification process that we recently underwent, petition status for closure petitions, the case closure denial review, which is going to take the place of petitions, we hope, talk about the low-threat UST case closure policy checklist that all of the agencies have been applying to their cases, and then talk about stuck cases in the I-710 corridor. This is that chart of case closures over time. You can see that there is a graph at the top of total cases, and we're up at around over 40,000, probably around 42, and that's fairly static. We're not getting a lot of new cases, of total cases. And our caseload is diminishing, you can see at a fairly constant rate, and that will hopefully reach the 0 line at the bottom at some point in the future. It's difficult to predict just exactly which of those lines it will take because we don't know what that caseload looks like. We think that the cases are going to be starting to get harder as we go. We think that in the past, you can see from the slope, we're closing at about 900 cases a year. We anticipate we'll probably be at about that this year. And this year's checklists that the agencies have been doing to implement the low threat policy We anticipate there's probably going to be about 900 next year because we've identified those that are eligible for closure, but we've not yet gone through the well abandonment and such. So we can see out in the future a couple of years, but past that couple of years, it gets a little foggier.
So why is the slope constant? Given all the changes we've implemented, the improvements to the program, why is that slope not getting steeper?
Well, this year agencies have focused on doing the checklist, going through their whole caseload. And so they've been identifying closures and sort of putting them into the closure bin without necessarily pushing forward on them. So we think there's the part of that, and we should catch up on that next year. But it also does lead us to believe that there might be some procedural impediments in the program, that there's only a certain amount of paperwork that agencies can get through in a given year, and that maybe 900 is just the limit, and that if there were streamlining processes, they might be able to move faster.
Are we planning to look at streamlining paperwork and procedural aspects of the program?
Yes, we're both looking at that internally and at the regions and locals, that we'd like to speed up our own closure processing. And likewise, if we can speed ours up, we can transfer that to the locals and the regions.
So when you next make your, was it 6-month report, should I be expecting a steeper slope?
I wouldn't expect in 6 months that we're going to see a tremendous step function, but yes, hopefully we could do that.
Thank you, Mr. Graves.
The LOP certification process was required by AB 1701, which was passed last year. It essentially changed our local oversight program. No longer does any local agency have the authority to implement a UST cleanup program, only agencies that have been certified by the State Water Board. And the board adopted those certification requirements on the first board meeting, passed the implementation of the AB 1701 at the first of the year, and we've taken the next 6 months here to implement that, get the LOP certification packages in, review them, and Tom Howard has approved all of those that are in-house. Only one agency, you can see City of Los Angeles, is still pending. They claim that they are going to be putting together a package, but evidently the bureaucratic processes in Los Angeles, they have to go to a city council meeting and get approval, and there have been various hoops they've been going through, and so we're still waiting, but we haven't taken any actions that preclude them from becoming certified in the future, but we're also not waiting. We're moving right ahead. 125 cases will be transferred to regional boards because of the LIAs, the local agencies that are not going to become certified. Some of those cases will get transferred to the regions. There's a few agencies, and notably in Region 2 and Region 4, where roughly 375 cases are going to come to the state board, and our staff in DWQ will be working on those before they go to the regional board. The City of Berkeley and the myriad agencies in LA. So as the regional boards close cases and they get staff time available, we will transfer those over. Now, while they're in our shop, we're going to make sure that the agency record has been uploaded to GeoTracker. We will perform the low threat closure checklist, and any cases that are eligible for closure, we will close them. And so in essence, we will be prepping them for the regional board. And if there's any RP that submits work plans or such, we will be then approving those work plans so we can keep the process moving while they're in this transition period.
That's a good update, you know, because remember we went through the whole thing about certifying and all those criteria. So the 21 have been, or 22 we'll expect statewide. How many did we used to have roughly?
We had 20, and we lost 2, and we lost 2 and gained 1, so we're at 21, something like that. Oh, how many LIAs did we lose? Well, that sort of depends on how you determine an agency. If an agency had 1 case, were they really an agency? I mean, I don't know. You know, and so there's probably 20 agencies that are no longer going to be, quote, in the business, but you could question whether there were a lot of them were really in the business to begin with. Petitions, these are closure petitions that responsible parties have submitted to the state board to ask for their case to be closed, overriding a closure denial. We have 58 currently in process, and you can see where those are. 14, we've performed the review and noticed the closure paperwork. 4 are on hold. That are commingled plumes. We have a new test that we're working with OCC on, and that is going to be coming to the board soon. We're preparing the case closure summary on 29 cases and a dismissal on 1, and the lead agency is actually going to close 10 of those. So we hope to, in the next few months, have cleared out and noticed all of these, and that we'll be working on other items, and petitions will hopefully be something that we really don't have to report too much on anymore. Closure request review. This is the follow-on to the petition process. In the November 8th implementation strategy for the low-threat closure policy, one of the items that the board requested is that to sort of preclude the petition process, which is cumbersome, has some legal requirements associated with it, that the state board staff would review every case closure request that is denied by the agency, regardless of whether it's petitioned or not. Well, we didn't have an ability to readily find those in GeoTracker, so we pieced together a couple reports, and we had to actually go through all of them. So there's been 723 requests, and we've gone through them all and weeded out the ones that don't require our review, and there's 462 for whatever reasons, and 324 are being closed by the agency, and so that's good news. We've completed the reviews on 44 in that next category. 31 we've determined are eligible for closure. 8 are not ready for closure, but they're in the process of working through the regulatory process, and 5 of them are not ready for closure, but we think that they're stuck and they're not moving ahead at all. And we're going to talk about stuck cases later on the presentation. We also have identified, there's 61 cases where the closure's been denied, but we have not performed the review yet, where that's our caseload that we're working through. And so you would imagine that if the statistics up above are similar, of those 61, there will be a large percentage that are eligible for closure, some will be stuck, and yet some will be on track. And we imagine that this is going to be an ongoing staff task. As people apply for closure, this list will just get longer. And we hope to get our review fast enough, quick enough, and efficient enough that we can be real time, and that after 60 days or so that we would be able to come in on Monday morning and just review those and be a regular part of our work. GeoTracker has been a big part of enabling us to do this. And the next charts that I'm going to show you are associated with the low-threat LTCP checklist, low-threat closure policy checklist, and the summary report and the validation page. And so you're going to see a bunch of statistics. We also have a number of things that we need to do yet in GeoTracker, and we have an FSR in process. You can see the things that we'll be reporting on in the future. And Karen Larson is here to talk about where we're at in the FSR procurement.
Good afternoon, board members. For our new board members' benefit, I'm Karen Larson, the director of the Office of Information Management and Analysis. And I have the project management unit in my office. Those staff manage all of our data system projects, including working with DWQ on GeoTracker, and that includes all of the procurement and contract management. We have been working closely with DWQ as well as administrative services and our control agency, Department of General Services, to get this procurement through. The FSR is complete and approved, so we're now moving to the procurement process. We anticipate, we're still trying to get the procurement in place this fiscal year. However, it has yet to go for final review to DGS, which we anticipate happening either today or tomorrow. We do have Plan B in place in case it is not able to get through this fiscal year, and have the funding identified in next fiscal year so that we can get it in place immediately upon next fiscal year's beginning. And we will have a budget in place, and so that won't be a barrier to us. And the UST program enhancements will be the top priority items that we will be working on immediately once it's in place. So.
Thank you. So the results of the reviews that have been done, you can see here this is a graph that is distributed by agency. Orange is good on this graph. And so you can imagine each of these as a tank that you're trying to fill up with water or fill up with reviews. You'd like to get to the top and then you're done. The first one, Region 4, is about 2/3 done. Region 5 is about 2/3 done. And you look down and agencies are either more or less about 2/3 done. And at about 2/3 of the way through the year, you should be about 2/3 or 3/4 of the way done. Some agencies aren't doing so well. And we have called those agencies and said, we're going to be presenting this to the board, you know, what's your story? And each of them has says, well, that's because a lot of them haven't been finalized in GeoTracker, that they're still pending. And we have the ability to, you know, save your work and come back to it later. And there are review processes that the agencies are doing. So even though, for instance, San Diego County looks like it is a poor performer there, they actually have a lot in pending, and they've assured us that they're going to be done by August 16th. And so we will be watching that very closely to see if they're able to live up to that.
So you can tell Board Member Dodek that this chart will be really different in 6 months. Is that what you're saying?
This will, we hope, be very, very different in 6 months. One that is there with a 0 on it, Los Angeles County, we are getting those back. Those are the ones that are going to be transferred to the state board, and they are giving up the program. So they will have none. However, Los Angeles City, we expect that they're going to, if they choose to pursue the LLP certification, would bump those numbers up a bit. And they claim that they're going to be able to finish by August 16th as well.
Do you happen to know where they're putting it? Which agency?
The fire.
Fire. Oh,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
So the next slide is going to take those orange bars, and we're going to slice the orange section, the good section. And this slide, green is good. So all of the reviews that have been done, this is split between meeting the criteria in the policy and not meeting the criteria in the policy. And so if it's green, that means it meets the closure criteria in the policy and it's going to move through and be closed. And the pink are ones that do not meet the closure criteria. And so during the adoption of the policy, there was a lot of speculation about how many meet the policy, what percentage and such like that. And this is a first cut at what the agencies believe their percentage is of meeting the policy and not meeting the policy. I should point out that on the previous slide, we looked at when we reviewed their closure denials, that there were a large percentage of those that the agency had denied closure because it doesn't meet the policy, and yet state board staff believe it does meet the policy. And I think you'll see a little bit of a comparison there. This is checklist validations. We have a contractor who we pay for with in-kind services from EPA, the Sullivan Group, and we've tasked them, one of their tasks is to go through the checklists and using criteria of the policy and how we've trained them to look and see whether or not they think the checklist was filled out correctly and whether the agency has correctly captured what is in the site record on GeoTracker and transmitted it to the checklist. And as you can see, there's 3 groups there. Each of those groups add up to 100%. The first group is, do they generally agree with the checklist the way it's filled out? And you can either look at that as being good or bad in that, wow, 75%, they agree that the agency is on target in capturing the record, or you could say that, wow, 25% of the time, you know, the agency has missed it. The next group, eligible for closure, 8%, 84 cases there, out of 1,100, they feel like the agency missed it and it is truly ready for closure. 20% are clearly not eligible for closure, and 72% they couldn't tell when the amount of time they had. And we've limited them to 30 minutes on these reviews. And so this is a very quick look. They're being very fast to just give us their impressions because we want them to look at as many cases as possible, get a broad view over how these agencies are performing.
So, I'm sorry, that makes some sense. So then it's a quick review. So, you know, like nobody goes to jail for this, or no, I shouldn't say that because people go to jail now. What, nobody gets, you know, a gold star or not a gold star for this. This is just to give us a sense of how well it's going.
This is
Okay.
us a sense. What we have done is we are talking to the agencies about our evaluations of their checklists. And we've met with at least 10 of the agencies to discuss these results, and each have been very receptive to our feedback. The last group, on track and off track, is disconcerting in that they think 40%, if we let the regulatory process run through its regular course, 40% will get to closure. And 60% are just, they're stuck. They're off track. They're dead-end cases, as it were. Many different names for the same effect. So we're going to look at the stuck cases now in the next slide and see why they're stuck. So here are those off-track, stuck cases, and there's 4 groups of impediments there. They don't add up to 100%. The lead agency impediments are things that the agency has control over. How much they pursue enforcement, how aggressively they do oversight, what their cleanup goals are, and how they transmit those. And there were 30% of the cases that it looked like the agency wasn't pushing very hard. And if you look down to the next one, responsible party impediments, where either there's no responsible party, they're recalcitrant, there's no funding, you can see there at 36%. And that causes us to wonder whether or not there are stuck cases out there that have no responsible party, no funding, and the agencies have basically given up on them as dead-end cases, and it's not worth their time. We still have those on the books. We're going to have to figure out how we're going to go and attack those really, really stuck cases, because the regular process doesn't work. And there's, you can see the next group, the site-specific impediments, commingled plumes, unsuccessful corrective actions, and such. So
Kevin, can I jump in for a minute?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, this might sound a little discouraging, but to me, this is exactly why we did low threat closure, is so that we had staff resources to start looking at these stuck cases.
And we're going to plan to do that. The DWQ staff are going to be, we're going to be transitioning from, hopefully, from petitions and from closure reviews onto the stuck case reviews. That's our hope. So let's talk just a little bit about our experience with stuck cases. We've had a Sullivan group working in the I-710 corridor, the partners. This is kind of fun because we talk about dead-end sites, and here was a site that we ultimately ended up removing tanks that were abandoned in place and doing site work, and yet it had this sign that was a dead-end site, so we like that. So here's the I-710 corridor. EPA and the Water Board have been focusing on this with our consultant to look at all of the cases there, figure out why they're not moving, and we found out that there were a lot of abandoned tanks, a lot of cases that, because this is an EJ focus area, there's not a lot of economic activity, and people had just walked away. There were stations that were burned in the Rodney King riots, and they were just in the same condition as the day that they were burned. But in the past couple of years, we've been able to do field work at 23 sites, get 53 sites closed just because of information transfer and getting the paperwork, you know, and information to agencies, actually pulling tanks. And that's an important thing. There were more abandoned tanks than we ever realized in this area. And as you'll see in the next slide, we're extending that statewide. And we've pushing 90 sites moving forward through the cleanup process. So what we're hoping to do is bring our contractors up and teach us how to move these stuck cases, and so that my staff can take this on statewide and start pushing on the bottom end of these cases, and the cleanup fund and the agencies are pushing on the top end, and we can shrink our caseload. And here's my last slide. This is our abandoned UST initiative that was an outgrowth of the I-710. We polled the CUPAs, which are the permitting agencies, and they reported that there's 323 facilities with potentially over 700 tanks that are still in the ground, abandoned. And these are truly the stuck cases because they're not in the permitting program and they're not in the cleanup program. And yet we have in this slide here, USTs with product is in blue, over 100 USTs with product still in them that are going to leak sometime if we don't do something to get them out of the ground. So that's going to be our focus moving forward. Hopefully we can get the closures on a faster track and focus more of our efforts here. Thank you. I'll transition to Lisa here. Do you need this?
I do need that. It went away. I did something wrong.
So whoever's next.
I am, but I don't know how to use this.
Oh, okay.
Oh. So this presentation is going to be fairly different. Get your accountant hats on. You know, roll up your sleeves, put on your visor. Okay, oh, there we go. Okay. I'm Lisa Babcock. I'm the UST Cleanup Fund Manager. And I'm going to cover a number of topics today that have some variety. It's going to be Cleanup Fund 101 plus a lot of work that we've all been doing over the last year or so. So first I'm going to be talking about, a number of topics: the health of the UST Cleanup Fund, the status of claims, recent changes, and the future of the fund. So I'll start off with the money. Petroleum storage fees are paid by operating gas stations to the Board of Equalization. Revenues are collected each fiscal year. And starting in 1990, that's what this historic graph is showing you. The blue line is showing that there have been lots of fluctuations over time, even as the statutory amount of the fee has increased, and that's what that green bar at the bottom is showing, is the fee in cents over time. And revenues have dropped in 2004, we don't know why, and they are again have been dropping over the last few years. We have no control over how much fuel is stored or purchased, so we have no control over the revenues that are in the fund. There is a 2010 fee bump up to 2 cents from 1.4 cents, which was expected to provide a steady increase in revenue until this coming January, when it is scheduled to end in about 6 months. There is a bill, AB 282 Wachowski, that is intending to extend that fee till the current fund sunset. We've estimated about $500 million are left to be collected prior to the current fund sunset, which is January 1st of 2016. Let's see. And this focuses on the last few years of that previous graph, and also just shows that the state budget anticipated higher revenues than we actually have collected over the last 5 years, and in the total loss, so to speak, is about $260 million fewer dollars in the bank. That means that much less money is available to reimburse for corrective actions, and people depend on the reimbursements. As you know from the last couple of slides, that the size of this pie is less than last year's pie. This says budget, but in this case it's our budget based on our projected revenues for the next fiscal year. The Cleanup Fund provides most UST owners with a financial responsibility mechanism as required by federal law. About 3/4 of the fund pays for the site work. The blue is for reimbursing claimants reasonable necessary costs incurred for corrective action up to $1.5 million per occurrence. It's like an insurance fund. And the red is mostly the fund's sub-account special programs for direct payments of contractors for investigation and cleanup of emergency situations, abandoned sites, sites with recalcitrant responsible parties, and brownfields, which Kevin is eyeing for the stuck cases. Half of that remainder of the pie is for Water Board and local oversight program regulatory oversight funding that work. And the other half is the cost of administering the fund, fraud, waste, and abuse prevention program, and state administrative costs. So now we're going to get into the concept that Liz showed this slide back in January when she did her presentation. And it's showing, just to get us clear, at least today, on there's a regulatory case, that's what Kevin talks about, and then there are claims, which are claims against the fund. And there it is possible for there to be multiple claims for one case. It's possible to have multiple cases and one claim. So it's very interesting, but what we're going to talk about is pretend that they are on a one-to-one today, because I'm going to be showing you the case status, the regulatory status of the claims in the cases that are in the fund and the cases that are not in the fund, and break that down as well. All right. So the shorter bar is those cases that are in the fund. And in this case, and throughout my slides, they're going to all be blue. Is going to be good. So the cases that are in the fund, you know, by far most of them, more than 3/4, are closed cases. They're closed regulatory cases. And even more so for those cases that are not in the fund. The red or orange is those open cases that are eligible for closure. Those are the ones that agencies have determined are eligible for closure. They meet the closure criteria, but they haven't gotten through that process of getting them closed. The public noticing, actually the well abandonment that is something that the responsible parties are responsible for doing. So there's that, but we know that they're moving toward closure. And what's important about the blue and the orange is that those are set costs. They're going to be, we'll know how much that is that the fund needs to reimburse the cases. And the green are the open regulatory cases. And then this one is only focusing on the fund claims and looking at, so the bar on the right side is the same as the bar we saw on the previous slide. For the active claims, those are the ones that are being funded now. There aren't too many that are closed, but about 40% are closed plus closing. So we know what that means is that we can expect for those that are closed, the blue ones, that within a year they'll be closed claims, because there's a relatively new statute that says that they have to submit their last reimbursement request within 365 days of the date of the case closure. And then the orange will be a little bit farther beyond that, but we can expect to see about 40% of the currently active claims, which is about 1,100, off the books in a couple of years. But we have the priority list, which is a waiting list. So as those claims come off the active list, we activate the claims from the priority list. We actually have closed of the, we have over 8,000 claims that are closed. We actually do have open regulatory cases. So that may be because they ran out of money or some other issues. So we're breaking down some more on the active claims that we're paying out now. What I'm merely going to do is skip to this slide, and because Fran wants me to. So the statute is a reminder that the statute created a priority system for which claims are paid first, A are residential tanks, B are small businesses with less than 100 employees, C are medium businesses with less than 500 employees, and D are larger businesses with over 500 employees. Reimbursements are to be made in priority order, so A's before B's, B's before C's, except that statute also provides that for the C's and the D's, a minimum of 14% of the funds that are available for reimbursement are reimbursed to them. Claims are activated when there's sufficient revenues. Over $3.2 billion, that's a B, have been reimbursed to nearly 8,300 closed claims and the 2,700 active claims to date. And there are about 4,500 claims on the priority list. And as you will see, most of them are priority Ds. Now we're going to go backwards. Oh, if I knew how to. Oh, wheel back. Oh. Oh, I'm going forward. Okay. All right. All right. So for the active claims, you know, as is the priority A's are being funded. There are very few, but they're active, and as soon as any come on to any claims become eligible, we activate those and get them funded. There are many priority B's. Many are open, but many are getting ready to close if they aren't already. Priority C's and D's are both getting their 14%. And you'll see then for the priority list, the waiting list, you'll see that there are no A's. There are, I don't know, about 12 or 13 B's. There's 83 C's. And then the rest are primarily priority Ds, which are mostly closed. So the good news is that, you know, as we can get the greens turned to blues, then we won't have that kind of open checkbook. The amount at least will be set and now set in terms of the costs that need to be reimbursed. Okay, I'm going to catch up with my paper. So as you may know, prior to 2008, the fund balance was greater than the demand for claim reimbursement, and the fund ran out of cash. Claims were suspended for a period of time. There was an external audit of the fund and a task force of interested parties, both of which made recommendations, and which we've been implementing over the last few years. Investigations into fraud was found to be more common. And as you've seen, there have been dropping revenues, and there's a greater pressure on the fund for resources. And then there's the rising costs of corrective action. The average case has been open for 17 years, and many still have not completed site investigation. Even without active investigation or remediation, just monitoring for 17 years can use up about a third of the $1.5 million cap. And we do have about over 400 claims that do exceed the $1 million, exceed $1 million. New laws and board actions have changed the nature of the fund and the cleanup program as a whole, especially the closure policy. So I'm going to go through some of the nuts and bolts changes that we've been implementing over the last couple of years. So an important thing to remember is we don't have control over the money that comes in. The money that's collected is pretty much all we have. The amount to be reimbursed is now tied to the actual fee revenues. The fund didn't know what eligible costs had not yet been submitted. And in 2011, we set aside part of the budget, most of the budget for that year, and gave an administrative deadline and said, if you submit to us your old costs those incurred before July 1st of 2011, we have money to reimburse you. So we've done that. We still get some of those trickling in. Since that time, what we've been doing is we identify claim by claim a set aside for ongoing work during the year. There's not enough money to for all the work that's needed. So basically we identify for the A's and the B's the amount of money that they need to get for the work they plan to do to get reimbursed, and then the C's and D's have their 14% limit. And there's a lot of desire to have more money, but that's all we have. Let's see. All right. Since 2009, many recommendations have been implemented which have improved fiscal management, and that includes, in addition to what's been listed up here, includes having a separate function for revenue forecasting. We're enforcing existing regulations to guard against further fraud. We weren't very strict about that in the past. We have the cost controls of the annual site budgets. And we look at each claim, everything that we're doing, even the special accounts work, we look at each claim through the filter of the closure policy to ensure that the fund is reimbursing ongoing work that's on the path to case closure. And it's really very interesting and very different, looking at cases through the closure policy filter. It's different from somebody's kind of gut reaction. You know, it's like, oh, looks one way, but if you look at the criteria, it's pretty different. Oh, more stuff. So this kind of ties in with what Kevin was talking about earlier. One of the things that the board directed the DFA to do was for those cases where the fund's 5-year review process, which is a statutory requirement, had previously recommended that the agency pursue case closure. Our staff have focused on reviewing those cases against the closure policy. We always prefer that the local agencies close those cases if they desire, and they've done that quite a bit. So I'll add these numbers up for you, but basically about 442 out of the 555 that we, as of about last August, are either closed or heading toward closure. The regulatory agencies have they have closed 141. They've said they're going to close 165, so that's like 306 off this list. The regulatory agencies are closing. Of 135 cases that we've completed reviews within the fund, the ones that the agencies haven't said they're going to close, let's see, 23, the State Board has directed closure. An order has been signed by the Executive Director, which means they're not really closed yet. We have to wait 6 months until the rest of the closure activities are completed. 25 are currently being public noticed, and 88 are in the process. They'll be public noticed in the next month or two. We have not finalized our reviews for 83 of them, but they're all well on their way. And so far, of all of those, only 27 have not met the closure criteria, which is not a real surprise, since they had already been pre-selected as probably being ready for closure, or closure under the previous types of criteria. We've been working really hard, as I know DWQ has. We've all been working hard. So another, with the new LOP certification, program. This is the first year that the LOP contracts have been administered by DFA, and of the 21 certified LOPs to date, 19 have requested and have contracts, which are getting out to them now. They're late in the process for their signature. And as caseloads change from year to year, the contract dollars may be changing. And what we've done is we've kind of shifted the scope of the contracts to focus on the priorities of the board, the new laws, the closure policy, and the board resolutions. We have reports on the web. We have the annual report that's required. We have quarterly reports that we have the executive director report links to. The closure status reports are linked from the executive director report. They're updated monthly, whether you get an executive director report or not. And looking forward. So we do have a fund sunset currently January 1st of 2016. It most likely will be extended perhaps, but whenever that actually happens, well ahead of whenever the fund sunsets, we need to be looking at switching to other financial assurance mechanisms for operating USTs. Deadlines for new claim application, so that, you know, every time we accept a claim that's $1.5 million potentially that we may end up reimbursing a claimant, and then deadlines for submittal and processing the reimbursement requests. What we do have that we were talking about earlier are some programs that can help with kind of the wind down, the EAR account, or which you will be considering in July. Orphan sites, which are brownfields, commingled plumes, which is the ability to pool funds between among multiple claims, and the schools account. So we're on the web. We're done. And now for the really fun stuff.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Marcus, honorable board members, and executive staff. I'm Chris Kerrigan from the Office of Enforcement, and I was going to give a brief update on the fraud, waste, and abuse prevention efforts of your staff, and in conjunction with the Attorney General's office. By way of background, in 2010, the State Board staff began investigating an entity called E2C Consulting Services. And as a result of that, a gentleman named Philip Goldwyn, who's the president of that, pled no contest to misdemeanors submitting fraudulent claims to the UST fund. A couple months later, he agreed to a civil settlement in which he paid $1.2 million in restitution to the fund. And also, he entered into a stipulated judgment whereby civil liabilities would arise in the future for certain types of misrepresentations submitted by his company. The reason I give you this background in part is for background, but also because about 3 months ago, we leveraged on that stipulated penalty provision in the judgment and collected another $75,000 in a settlement for misrepresenting claims to the fund. So as a result of that action, a fraud, waste, and abuse prevention pilot project was developed, that's a lot of P's, at the State Board, and we began investigating complaints from citizens and whistleblowers about potential fraud against the fund. And a couple years ago, case number 1 came about, and that was a case where we filed civil and criminal charges against Kurt Hayden and Hayden Environmental, Inc. And as I'm sure you're all aware, on Friday, Mr. Hayden entered a plea of guilty to submitting false claims to the fund, a felony plea. And here's some cool statistics, which I will not be showing you on a graph. He will serve 180 days in jail. He will be on probation for 3 years. He will pay $2.4 million at least in restitution to the fund. He will not work any further in environmental remediation or make any further claims to the fund during the period of his probation.
And he will not submit any pending claims that were not submitted by May. So if he did work for which he did not submit claims, we will not accept those claims. And those are the terms of his plea deal on case number 1. We've also referred 2 additional cases to the Attorney General's office for prosecution last year in 2012, at which search warrants were executed at these businesses. In case number 3, we collected 70 boxes of paper documents and a lot of electronic files. And in case number 4, 95 boxes of documents. And just for context, if you line them up from end to end, they go all the way from one side of this room to the other and back. So your staff will be reviewing those documents in consultation with the Attorney Generals and criminal and civil investigators and attorneys to try to build an additional case or determine basically the value of any cases and whether there was criminal misconduct in those 2 cases or whether we'll simply be seeking civil restitution against those 2 parties. Additionally, in the very recent past, we referred a 4th case over to the Attorney General's office. And when we send these referral packets, they include a lot of evidence and basically essentially a request for the Attorney General's office to represent us in court since we lack the authority to take administrative enforcement for false claims. And so this 4th case has been referred, and we just recently got a Deputy Attorney General assigned for that case. And I have a 5th case that will be on my desk, I'm assured, for my review when I return from my vacation. So the cases have been built by our fraud, waste, and abuse prevention staff. Once the case referrals go over, as much as it seems like the real work may be done and we're kicking the case off to the Attorney General's office, that is not the case. We do a substantial amount of review and analysis of the documents in the context of the fund requirements and our own regulations, where we have great and detailed subject matter expertise. We also, in the context of our investigation, we have uncovered some lab fraud by labs who submit compliance data for NPDES permits and WDRs. By way of background, the labs who submit compliance data are certified by Department of Public Health under their ELAP program. We have uncovered several improprieties, including this first case where we provided an evidence packet and authority for prosecuting for DPH, in which the labs purported to do tests for which they do not own or possess the equipment required. We're hoping that, and of course, as you all know, compliance data is critical for us to determine whether people are in compliance with their permits, but also whether there are violations or ongoing violations that might be impacting public health or the environment. Without competent compliance data, we can't take enforcement, but more importantly, we don't know what's happening to water quality. And so it's really critical for our programs that we get reliable lab data. So your staff prepared an excellent package of information and provided it to DPH with the hope that they will take enforcement action as they are authorized to do under their statutory schemes. Importantly and finally, the Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Prevention Unit has been working very closely with the Cleanup Fund staff to try to develop easy ways and protocols to detect or identify